listening to the Adventure Party for the third week of March 2021. This week, this party discuss what happens when your natural 20s fall under the couch. No? It's the other kind of role? The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop play gaming the Irish way. Welcome to the party. I'm Scarr.
I'm Savage.
And I'm Owen.
And we are here to talk today about roles and the playing thereof. And how, over the years, what roles we play in our gaming groups, particularly our RPG groups, have changed a bit. And some of them have been thrown by the wayside as if they were trash and foolishness, and that they must be purged from our gaming experience. And we're here to ask if that was actually true.
Is it true? Of course it's true. Look at all the jobs we've lost in this new RPG economy. Like, there's just no place for a good crafter anymore, or a party healer, or if we want to get really meta, someone who makes maps of the horrible dungeons you're crawling through. Nah, you just scroll around and roll 20. You can see exactly where you've been. Nothing's hidden. No line of sight. No need for a map maker. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yes. Well, I had two in mind, and I think Mapper is probably the one to go over first. So this is one of the roles that's recommended that a party have in, your original D&D white books or your first ed DMG, and it's the idea of that there's one person in the party whose job it is to make the party's copy of the map of the dungeon that you're going through. So the GM has their little graph paper version of the map behind their DM screen, and they call out the dimensions of each room to the party, both to inform the party of how big this room full of 50 goblins is, but also so that the mapper can make a map. And over the years, this role has basically disappeared, and there's a lot of reasons. Some of them pretty obvious, some of them a bit more subtle. But does anyone else want to weigh in on the whole process first before I start throwing in my ideas?
Well, the mapper is intimately tied to the notion of dungeon crawling. But it sort of exists as another thing, that of the generalized note taker. It's a kind of a subset of that skill, where this is the person recording what's going on for our further elucidation. Now, the reason why it's gone away is that GMs move to often mapless encounters, or not carefully mapping out a dungeon. They just there's some stuff in the dungeon. There's 6 rooms. I jot down where the 6 rooms are, what's in them. I don't really care much about which is next to which one or how do they all fit together. They're just there, And you'll occasionally see older players get intensely annoyed about maps not making sense in RPG products, published ones, going, this doesn't make any sense. If I rotate these 2 maps, they don't match up perfectly. The 2 entrances do not match perfectly to this the level 3 levels above. This is ridiculous. Why is there no quality control on this? It's because the later generation of people don't really think about it like that. They're just, I'm going to build a map for the play space that I want to have. And this is the 5th room because it's got the boss in it. Not because it makes sense from an architectural standpoint. So they're looking at it a bit more kind of a gamist sort of, this is a game. You can't get to the final room from taking 2 right turns. That's crazy. It's no, that will be how certain people would design their dungeon. So it's a different approach, and it kind of fell by the wayside a little bit because the pattern of play changed a little bit. Players were allowed to become lazy. I'm not being, pejorative here.
No, I think that's true in the sense that the relationship between the players and the space they're in became tenuous. You'd always sort of find the next room, or you won't have to backtrack to discover something, or to check on a route that you didn't take. I blame Skyrim, personally.
Oh, it's been around for a bit longer than that, I think.
Yeah, but it's definitely at the point where people who are making game encounters and dungeons and things for tabletop play starting to take more and more inspiration from what they see and what they come up on in computer games, And this isn't old man Savage going, oh, computer games. Like, you can go back and play some quality computer games from the RPG space that require you to pay really close attention to where you are and where you are in relation to other things. So map making and map awareness in games isn't something that computer games have bred out of players, but we've kind of become, as Owen was saying, it's a lot looser, and the need for a map goes away because it goes away because of one fundamental thing. No one's going to do a job in a role-playing game that doesn't contribute to your success or your survival. And if you don't need to really know where you are in relation to other things in the dungeon, then it's not really a necessary job and you're not going to do it. Life and death depended on that.
Like, nobody gets lost anymore.
You can't get lost in a dungeon for a couple of different reasons. Rangers, for example.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, there would come a point in older games where someone would say, okay, we need to get out of here in a hurry. What's the best way out? And everyone would look at the guy with the graph paper and he'd go, okay, have I mapped this correctly? Is this going to get us out of here? Or are we going to get caught up and possibly killed? Which is great.
Like, the general note taker is still pretty strong as a role, as a meta role in things. But yeah, this very specific skill of mapping out the dungeon space has sort of gone by the wayside because the classic mega dungeon where there's like 5 ways in and every other level has got a teleporter that leads to somewhere else in the dungeon, and if you can use the pit traps as a way to get up to the level above you, etc., etc. That sort of situation has gone away because, not that dungeons have gone away, but there's been a much bigger emphasis on dungeons as a one session or couple session experience, or as Owen pointed out, the idea of a less fixed dungeon, something that's is really just sort of a set of points. It's called a point crawl. Is that, here's the room with the dragon in it, here's the room with the living treasure chests, here's the science room, and there's like a whole bunch of connection points between them, some of them secret, some of them obvious, and that's the way a lot of dungeons get assigned now. And there's even like people who just sort of generate dungeons on the fly. Like, it's more like instead of a random encounter table, it's a random dungeon table.
Yeah, they've got their place. But, I mean, even a randomly generated thing can be mapped if, maybe the GM and the players are discovering it at the same time. But at some point, it'd be nice if someone had to turn around and go, well, where is the cobalt layer in relation to that waterfall? Maybe that should be a thing that is required.
That's the thing, is that when you do go back to the whole big dungeon thing, the intent is to go to where you have a very much of a sense of place. It's just like you're trying to control this environment, which is fundamentally chaotic and unpredictable. And sorry, it's a 1 in 12 chance of encounters every 10 minutes or something. Sorry, using the old numbers there. But this is what I'm getting is that the idea of a dungeon as a space to master has gone from the only way to play, because that's how Gygax thought about it, has gone from the only way to play to a sometimes food.
Well, there is no need to slavishly map out every 5 feet of space you cross in a game. But, dungeon mapping is a sometimes food, because you don't spend all your time in dungeons anymore. I'd like to see it come back,
Does anyone build maze dungeons anymore?
Old school revival people.
I have used mazes as parts of dungeons, because I like them as a sort of objects in time and space puzzle, especially if the maze is filling up with boiling water or bees or something like that. And that's another, like, there has to be a reason. Like, all of these, we should get off map making now, because we've a few others to cover. But all of these roles that are missing or gone or lost, there needs to be a reason to have them in your game. You need to give your players a compelling reason why you should be doing this. Otherwise, it's Ren fair in the D&D space or in the role-playing space. There's no reason to make maps unless you've got a good, we're going to die if we don't do this reason. But I think there's lots of really good ways to have good reasons to make maps. And if you're setting up a dungeon, have a bit of a think about it. See if you can work it in. The other thing it does, it allows you to make very spatially complex spaces that the player is going to rely on a map to figure out which of the golems on layer 2 lines up with the portals on layer 3, and if we move the golems around, that'll allow us to do this thing, and you're going to need a map to see what the relationship is, or else you're going to have to do a lot of head scratching. So yeah, make good reasons and then make good maps.
Also, you can do a secret room that isn't just findable by making a perception check. It's like, you've actually got to map this out. The Lich's headquarters is not in a room you can find. He has walls that he magically opens and closes. You can't find it. Except you draw the map, you're like, what's this big space in the middle with nothing in it?
I like that one. That's good.
With corridors that go down to it, but there's nothing else there. There's a secret door there. Somehow. And you see that if you're playing online on a VGT map, and you're like, hang on, there's a big space here. I bet there is a thing. Are you metagaming when you do that? I don't actually think so, because if you had someone making a map of a dungeon as you're going around, you would see, hang on, these corridors come down here, and there's nothing here. Doubt, you know?
Now we've got a mystery created by the mapping.
Yeah, and I think that brings up another point, is that we have tools to make mapping smoother now, either by helping the mapper to keep their notes, or to automate the task so that the party can own the map, but like it's still a matter of, you gotta beat feet around to, fill in these gaps. Like VTTs, I'm very sure some old school grognard has found a way to force a you draw the map element into VTTs somewhere.
Yeah, it'd be worth thinking about.
You could do it, but it would be a tremendous amount of work. How would you have to make them keep uploading it? Oh no.
You have a shared whiteboard off to the side.
Yeah, you could do that. I mean,
remember, we're role-playing in 2021. Yeah. Everyone's got 2 monitors, right?
You better.
Okay. So map making, the map maker, and a vital lost art. Make more confusing spaces so that your players have to map it. Let's move on then to the other, and this is the one I feel strongly about, the shot caller. Anyone know what a shot caller is? It's not just a guy at the bar.
The term used in, the first ed DMG is the caller. The shot caller is a prison terminology guy. He's the guy who calls who gets shot. That's not quite the same thing Gygax intended.
It replaces a more toxic term, though, Shane.
Oh?
Quarterback.
Ah.
Because that's what the shot caller is. And if there's anything the nerds hate, it's the jocks.
Nice
so
jocks.
You can't call him a quarterback, despite the fact it's very much the quarterback. It's the person calling the play. That's what the shot caller is.
What's to be said about the shot caller?
Okay, so the concept... Okay, so there's the stereotypical version of the concept, which is that you basically have a party leader, and he, when everyone makes their actions, he goes, no, you do that instead, you do that instead, blah, 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 blah. And everyone hates them, everyone kicks them out of the group, and there's just random chaos afterwards. That's the stereotypical version of it.
Yeah, because that's just being a jackass.
Yeah. There's the actual DMG version, though, and this takes these days it takes either having a copy of the ancient GMG, which is like 40 years old, or, reading an awful lot of sketchy OSR blogs to really get the idea.
Okay, hold on a second. I'd say plenty of people are familiar with the shot caller's role. If you've ever, if you're familiar with who Leroy Jenkins is, then the other character in that drama is the shot caller on a raid in World of Warcraft. Callers. I shouldn't keep using my prison lingo. Callers or quarterbacks are a vital part of any end-level high sort of complexity computer game MMO stuff. You see it in Destiny, you see it in WoW, you see it all over the place. That there's someone who understands the mechanics of a fight, it's usually a boss encounter, and is basically a sort of a conductor for an orchestra of talent who might have a lot of different disciplines lined up, much like an adventuring party. So it's the role is alive and well in other forms of gaming, but has completely dropped out of tabletop gaming because, I don't know, this is the point I say something about communism.
No, it's that the encounters aren't hard enough.
Yeah.
The only reason you have a shot caller or quarterback is because the individual tactics, there are more and less engaged players in a tactical game space. Some players are highly engaged. Some people are not. In computer RPGs raids, you self-select the players who are not going to listen out. They either aren't interested in being told what to do or are incapable of being told what to do, and they get pushed out either gently or not so gently and told if you continue to just run around like a lunatic, we do not complete this fight. You either stop running around like a lunatic and do exactly what I tell you to do, or you leave. The bigger the raid, the more latitude there is. In a 40-person raid, there's a lot of latitude for 15 people maybe messing about. In a 25-person raid, there's less latitude. 20, even less. 10, even less. 5 or 6, incredibly small amounts of latitude.
You want to be on your point, and you want to be faced the right direction.
Because they can make it more difficult with a smaller number of people. Because one person can wipe a raid if you've got a small enough raid. If you go make one mistake in the 6-person raid and you wipe, 6 people have to perform perfectly. That's doable. If you go make one mistake and you wipe in a 40-person raid, you will always wipe. Because every person will have something go wrong. Either they stop paying attention, they weren't paying attention initially, their computer busts, the cat jumps up on them, something goes wrong.
Alright, let's pull it back to the table, where I think a lot of this applies, and then you've got some other caveats. First of all, I think callers should generally be elected. Like they shouldn't want the job necessarily, but it's someone that the rest of the group trusts to know the mechanics of the game well enough to have a good tactical read on a fight, and to be someone they're willing to take a snap judgment from. And I like that. I think it can really build, and you can build it into the characters in your game as well. It doesn't always have to be the same person calling the shots in every single fight. You can sort of nominate, depending on what you're going up against. Someone, the ranger might have more experience, or you're going up against demons. It could be the warlock who knows a bit more about them. And you could fold that into the fight. That following the kind of guidance of that nominated character might give a benefit. So this is something the Dungeon Master can think about. But from the party point of view, So I would encourage that you shot call in character and in accordance with the sort of the time of your game. You don't have 10 minutes between 6-second action rounds to lay out a plan for everybody. So you make a plan going in based on what you know, and then the caller is going to have to make a decision about what instructions to issue in the very short amount of time they have between rounds, and who to issue to, and trust that everybody else remembers the plan and can work around it. And I think you're going to get this really interesting melange of planned sort of set pieces, snap decisions, and trying to figure out learn what your parties and your character's strengths and weaknesses are, and work from there. So I think it's a good role. It's an interesting role. I've played around with it in several different games. Doesn't always work, but I like it as a concept at least.
So I have 2 responses to this. One is about modern gaming, one is about old gaming. Let's go back to 1971. I want you to imagine Gygax's house. It's his, not tremendously huge, but still, 70s white person, large game room.
It's an American house. They have a lot of space. Their houses are big and made of wood.
So I want you to imagine the fact that there are 10 people in his room, several of his kids, Rob Kuntz, who is just the weird teenager who lives in his house most of the time, a whole bunch of his wargaming friends, and a couple of people who just heard about this D&D thing and are sort of interested in this whole theatrical acting thing. So he's got a huge party. Many of them have got multiple PCs. Many of those PCs have got a henchman or two. And they also have all the hirelings and donkeys that they have brought into the dungeon to carry off the loot. There's an organizational nightmare at the other end of the table. Gygax would like it if, instead of having to talk to everyone individually about what they and their 5 little tokens are doing, he would much rather they discuss it, fire questions over the DM screen with him, and after the 10 minutes of planning, one person comes to him with a cohesive plan of what the party is doing. That's the origin of the caller. It's in a situation where everything is so messy and complicated that the back and forth path between the GM and the party is more difficult. Or at least in Gygax's opinion it was. And so he needed everything narrowed down to a funnel so that there was just one back and forth of questions being asked and results being communicated back to the DM so that he could interpret it.
So Gygax only wanted one of his wives to talk to him once, yeah? So basically, this is a one-by-one thing. As someone who teaches, let me tell you, managing 25 people in a class requires a little bit of one person at a time speaks. That's the rule. And there's also a certain amount of, I have to go through everybody, and you do often. So sometimes you need to break the class up to go one-to-one. And it's not really feasible with an RPG party to go, okay, we're going to do this one at a time. Everyone join me outside the room for a little bit. I imagine he's like, you know what? You guys come to a decision and tell me what you're doing. I will sit here and sup my ales or something. I don't know.
Well, there's the information channel aspect, which I think sort of comes back to the mapper. I feel like one of the other things we overlooked about the mapper is that if you were one of the people who didn't care about the map and what the room looked like, having the GM sit there reading off box text for 3 minutes straight so that the mapper could scribble down on graph paper would have probably been very boring, and that's probably one of the other reasons why people have gotten rid of the mapper.
Okay, but anything you do wrong is going to be wrong. Like, there's a right way to do all of these things. And mapping should be well, remember, the dungeon turn is in 10-minute segments, which allows for map making. And you don't want to spend 10 minutes on each sort of move through a dungeon, but you would at least allow for some note scribbling and a couple of questions to orientate the map maker. But you don't spend a lot of time making sure you have every single thing right, because part of the fun of it is your map isn't necessarily going to be that accurate. Shot calling, well, like what you described in the Gygax household seems reminiscent of Noah's Ark, but like that's coming up with a plan. And that's also Gygax had too many people at his table, as he discovered. He was making this stuff up. And it's, but shot calling, I'm more interested in as a sort of a tactical role that is executed in a very finite amount of time.
Oh yeah, I understand that. But here's the thing I think that sort of transitions into the more modern gaming space is that this is going to sound really noodly and esoteric, but I think people are going to get is what your character does in combat part of a group's tactics, or is it a way of personal expression?
Ultimately, people would be better if they just let me move them around like chess pieces in an RPG. From an objective standpoint, they would generally be better just doing exactly what I told them to do. Because I'm often the most engaged tactical person there. And I often have the best understanding of the current metagame. That's just facts. Now, I know that's a terrible idea because people get upset about their own individual ability to express themselves. So I usually serve my advice with a big dollop of sugar. For example, with the person with the debuffing spells, I will often say, man, it'd be great to get a debuff on that guy right now. So I will attempt to steer them in that direction. But having the unchallenged power to go, you do that, do not do the other thing, do that, is not a goer in the current environment. People feel controlled, constrained, unable to exercise themselves and do what they see as their character would do. And that's fine. But I know it'd be better if they just did what they told them. And sometimes I kind of go, okay, we're losing this fight and it's potentially really bad. So everyone listen up, this is how we have to handle this. But that's a sometimes food. That's done very, very sparingly. Most RPGs are not hard enough to require that. Most RPGs are fine with everybody futzing around, But there are a small number of ones which are difficult enough sometimes to require, guys, we need to focus up now, because we're done if we don't focus up. And we need to take this fight with a certain amount of seriousness.
I think there's one other little mechanical tweak that I think has been may change the context. And that is the idea of, does everyone have their own initiative number, or is initiative a party thing? Like, it's literally just one dice at the start of the combat to see, do the monsters go first or do we?
There's individual initiatives that is popcorn initiative. And popcorn initiative where I go, then I pick a bad guy to go, or I pick a player to go. And I go, right, I go, now a player goes, now that player has to say, okay, monster goes, now it goes, okay, I say which player goes after me. You can have a player whose job it is to tell, say, who goes when, which can be very important. And sometimes the player will go, ooh, I really want to go because I've got a fireball and they're all in perfect position. So you can vary it depending on your initiative system. I know some people hate initiative. They think it's complete busy work. Total busy work. We have to roll dice to determine the order in which we roll dice, to see if we get to roll dice, to see if the opposition have to roll dice. This is madness.
If you want to play a tactical game, yeah, as often as not, even in a game where you have a fixed initiative order, you'll have a mechanic for delaying, which means that you end up, the party decides more or less what initiative they act in anyways. So I'm kind of in agreement that it's not really, it doesn't really add anything except the random variance of when you might act in a very strict sense. And it breaks a lot of shot calling or a lot of calling or quarterbacking, because you've no control over when things happen, or you have less control over when things happen.
Well, yeah, whereas if you were in original D&D, where it was literally, you roll D10, the monsters roll D10, the one who get the highest, they go first, and then we alternate from there. That was the old paradigm, and everyone moved as a group, and in that context, a caller becomes more sensible because you have this. You're not each person not doing their own thing. The party is working as a group, and therefore having one final person who has the final. I describe this to the GM, who again is marking this off. It is fundamentally clear. Like it sounds like Gygax used miniatures for combat encounters, but also was very finicky about mapping. So I'm not sure exactly how those two happened at the same time, but
he definitely used minis, because most of the weirder monsters in D&D come from buying cheap plastic miniatures to use in his games. And what the hell is this thing with two feathers coming out of its head that he bought from some Chinese knockoff shop? He's like, that's a rust monster. When it touches your metal, it dissolves. And everyone's like, ooh. So he got a bunch of stuff from that. So there's, he definitely used minis. And he I don't know if he went battle mat, but he definitely used minis. And he probably sketched out on paper the dimensions of a room for a particularly interesting fight and go, this is this mini here. Or maybe he just used it, this is this mini. And this is just a representation in front of you of what this miniature is. But he definitely used them in some regard. And because they had a wargaming route, I would imagine they used battle mats, or they used something like that. This is the dimensions of this battlefield. And dimensions in a battlefield are very important. I'd go, this is where the bridge is, this is where the walls are. And the players are like, we need to take that bridge. That, and that would be a chunk of their play, I'd say.
We can infer from the fact that they have fixed move speeds that that's something that comes directly from tabletop wargaming, and it's important that you can move this far and no further, or you can move further than this other thing in terms of where you are in space, which suggests battle maps or tabletop play with minis.
I'm reminded of a vaguely cool initiative thing, actually, I've only seen crop up once or twice in RPGs. It was in Stargate D20, which is if your initiative score was greater than 20, you could reduce it by 20 to get a second action on a turn. So permanently reduced it. So if I was a 28, if I'd invested in getting my initiative up, I could go, I got to reduce my initiative to 8, I act again this round. I think that's a cool idea for if you have really a character who focuses on going first, and then be like, actually, now I'm going to go again this round, so I get 2 actions this combat.
Acting at 28 and 8, or just acting twice at 8?
Acting at 28 and 8.
Yeah, Shadowrun and Second Ed did it as well. It's pretty abusable.
Absolutely, monstrously so. But it's because otherwise initiative is sort of, it's often a kind of a one-trick pony in a role. Now we have our order, apart from some shenanigans with delaying, which occasionally is very relevant.
Which I think, yeah, that comes back to the point is that these roles sort of come out of the needs of the mechanics they're supporting. The dungeon crawling, large group of PCs with, hangers-on who have to explore the space, find treasure, fight monsters, and get out. But as role-playing experimented with more and more mechanics, they tried newer and different things for things like initiative, for combat, for training. The landscape changed, and the need for certain specific roles, meta roles, sort of went away, and instead we began relying more and more of in-game roles, stuff like the healer, the supporter, the tank, the crafter, the party face. These became more important because the different mechanics that we were experimenting with could do more with them, while the meta roles that existed in a very specific space lost their supremacy.
Shane, the front line, the tank as the concept of the tank, often gets tied up with MMOs for me. Back in the initial iteration of D&D, I would get there being frontliners, let's say. But were there how did the tanks operate? Were they literally a wall of guys that you couldn't get past? Because D&D has always been pretty resistant to taunt mechanics. At any kind of, you have to attack me. And people get, the toys all leave the pram if there's something like that.
The answer there is that in a 10-foot corridor, you're going to have to work pretty hard to get past people.
Well, I think at that point, most of the quote-unquote tanking was done by your two hirelings with decent armor and spears. And they would be the ones doing the front line while, your fighters sort of went around the flanks to beat on the big monsters. And the wizards were pelting from the back while, also watching for the rear because, Gygax loved having guys pull out of secret rooms to flank you and such.
Dungeons are murder machines. I mean, that's perfectly expected.
But yeah, it's this thing is just like, you don't need a dedicated tank as much when you have a small army of people tromping through the dungeon. It's when you're down to every person is playing one character and we need someone to soak the damage. That's when the role of the tank becomes more important.
As it moved from a kind of quasi-skirmish game to something more one player equals one character focused.
It's an interesting point, actually, about dungeons being murder machines, because they aren't anymore. They're usually like a theme park you go through one room at a time, where all the initiative is on the side of the players, rather than, and now the tables have turned. And you don't see that much, like, oh my god, we've triggered 2 encounters at once, this is imbalanced, we're in real trouble. Whereas, actually, maybe it should be more about they put us in a tactically disadvantageous position all the time. And this is hard because it's not just we walk through rooms fighting bad guys and encountering people, it's some of these places are traps. That there's guys waiting to hit us from the rear as we come out. Maybe still a balanced encounter, but a very disadvantageous one from a tactical point of view, that we're really strung out here, we're in a narrow corridor and we're getting hit from behind and the front at the same time. What do we do? It doesn't really happen as much anymore.
Okay, do we have any others that we want to bring up before we finish up? So we don't want to roll too long on this. What's left? And the lost and discarded box in terms of party roles.
I think those are the two main ones that are really meta roles. Although, as I say, they sort of have modern day equivalents. The mapper has turned into the more generalized note-taking person. And the caller as a communications channel to the GM of what the party's doing has turned into the tactics guy, the quarterback, who is trying to help the party do their individual actions in a more overall advantageous way. So, in a certain sense, these roles are still there. They're just not formalized anymore. There's no section in the DMG explaining the very vital role of the mapper and the caller. It's just, here are some types of players. And this is why they're terrible and why they're also cool. That's sort of the modern take on them. It is an interesting bit of archaeology to see what different things were needed back in the day versus what we have today. And I think there's still some merit to experimenting with these kinds of roles. Maybe maybe you do want to rip out the initiative system of your favorite RPG and turn it into more of a team-based party discussion activity. Or maybe your group will hate that and stab you with knives. And maybe you do want to get away from theatre of the mind into a proper mega dungeon where people have to scour the place for clues as to where the Infinity Gauntlet is. And in that case, a mapper and some, hirelings to touch all the trapdoors could be very vital. But if you have a role of telling us how we're wrong that you'd like to take up, a very vital role in this modern gaming space, you can hit us up on your social media. But for now, this party's over. Thanks for listening to The Adventure Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventureparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventureparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventure Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike 3 license.